Holiday security. President Obama reassures Americans the country is ready for any potential terror attacks. Hope in Africa. The Holy Father gets a warm welcome in Kenya, his first stop on a three-nation Africa tour. A look back. We review the Nuremberg Trials and their legacy 70 years after they began in Germany. And Turkey Trot. We'll take you to Virginia, where a farmer is raising turkeys just like they did back in the days of Abe Lincoln. Those stories and more on EWTN News Nightly for Wednesday, November 25th, 2015. Good evening and thank you for joining us. I'm Wyatt Goolsby in for Brian Patrick tonight. After a closed-door briefing with his national security team, President Obama delivers a statement about how Americans should deal with security during the start of the holiday season. Cheers. Cheers. In a time of thanks, traditions, and travel, there is another word entering the conversation this year: terror.
I know that families have discussed their fears about the threat of terrorism around the dinner table, many for the first time since September 11th.
So President Obama, after what he called a regularly scheduled update with his national security team, said this.
I want the American people to know, entering the holidays, that the combined resources of our military, our intelligence, and our Homeland Security agencies are on the case.
He says as of now, the U.S. knows of no specific and credible intelligence indicating a plot in the United States, and adds if there was such intelligence, the public would be told about it. The president's words come less than 2 weeks after the deadly Paris terrorist attacks, after the Transportation Security Administration doubled down on security at airports, just in time for the busiest travel days of the year. Some travelers say they feel the difference.
Get the sense that people just say be a little more on alert than usual.
The extra security, so it makes me feel safe.
Time flies, even if turkeys don't.
Shortly after his remarks, the president continued the 52-year tradition of pardoning turkeys. This year, it was honest and Abe. He said the U.S. is resilient in the face of those who try to harm it, something he said for which everyone can give thanks. And French lawmakers vote to continue airstrikes against the Islamic State in Syria beyond early January.
Le débat est clos.
The Parliament's upper house voted overwhelmingly tonight to extend the fight against ISIS. The terrorist group has claimed responsibility for the November 13th attacks in Paris that killed 130 people and wounded hundreds more. French fighter jets joined the U.S.-led coalition against ISIS in Iraq in 2014 and expanded their mission to Islamic State targets in Syria in September. Now to other stories our EWTN News Nightly team is covering in today's world. An investigation is underway in Tunisia after an attack on a bus carrying presidential guards leaves 13 dead. Officials say 22 pounds of explosives were used in the attack Tuesday in downtown Tunis. The bomber is believed to be among the dead. No one has claimed responsibility. Life in Brussels is slowly getting back to normal. Students began returning to class in Belgium's capital after a 2-day shutdown. Public transportation and shops also reopened. The city was on high alert after warnings of an imminent attack. Special measures are being taken at schools, but parents are calm.
I'm not very concerned because they let children go to school again, so I suppose the alert level is quite reasonable. Otherwise they wouldn't open the schools, they wouldn't open the metro system. So I think it's a really good sign for the city.
More than 1,000 security personnel and soldiers are deployed throughout the city. Chicago prepares for more protests after the city released a video showing a white officer fatally shooting a black teenager. Protesters took to the streets last night and again this morning trying to block traffic in the Windy City. The video shows police officer Jason Van Dyke shooting 17-year-old LaQuaine McDonald 16 times in October of 2014. The 37-year-old officer is charged with first-degree murder. He's been taken off payroll and is currently held without bond. Chicago Archbishop Blaise Cupich released a statement praying for McDonald and other people killed by violence. He says we can honor their memory by encouraging our communities to turn away from violence and to work together in solidarity for peace and justice. Pope Francis lands in Kenya, beginning a three-nation African tour. The Holy Father is urging Kenyans to work for peace and forgiveness amid a wave of extremist violence on the continent. Pope Francis will also travel to Uganda and the Central African Republic. Catherine Szeltner has more on his trip. Catherine?
Why, this is Pope Francis's first trip to Africa, and his visit to the Central African Republic marks the first time a pope has flown into an active war zone, with new deaths reported daily. While many people are celebrating the papal trip, others are on edge with major security concerns.
Pope Francis receives a warm Kenyan welcome today with traditional African song and dance. Behind the vibrant celebration, however, the nation faces ongoing threats from Muslim terrorists. And the CAR has especially been rocked by violence since Muslim rebels toppled the president in 2013. In a sign the Vatican is on alert, Pope Francis's own chief bodyguard made a last-minute visit to the CAR for the latest security updates. But Pope Francis is clear he doesn't want to skip the Central African Republic, releasing this video ahead of the trip. The Holy Father saying his goal is to bring consolation and hope to the people. Pope Francis will visit a Nairobi slum to encourage young Christians in the face of Islamic extremism. In Uganda, he'll say Mass to honor the nation's martyrs, and he's expected to call for peace in the CAR. Africa's Catholic population has more than doubled in the last 30 years. It's expected to surpass that of Europe by 2050. One Kenyan bishop believes Francis will deliver a message that's become a theme of his pontificate.
Getting to reach the people and smell, he says, pastors must have the smell of the sheep. They must live among them, they must reach them, they must access them, and they must be accessible.
When asked if he was concerned about security risks today, Pope Francis answered, "I'm more afraid of the mosquitoes." The last pope to visit the CAR was St. John Paul II 30 years ago. Wyatt.
Catherine Szeltner, thanks very much. And we're happy to welcome back to the program Dr. Matthew Bunson from Catholic Distance University. So Matthew, Kenya is struggling with political corruption, religious conflict. What will Francis say about those issues?
Well, we've already had a good chance to hear some of the things that Francis is going to talk about when he's in Africa with his address tonight to the leaders of Kenya. He's talked, for example, about the necessity of bringing together the disparate cultures that you find in Kenya. We have a population of 44 million, but there are 42 separate tribes and language groups just in Kenya itself. So trying to bring them together for political unity is one thing. Then there's the religious strife question. Right next door in Somalia, you have Al-Shabaab, the terrorist organization that has killed hundreds over the last couple of years. Francis is asking all of them to work. The phrase that we're going to hear quite a bit from the Pope in Kenya is working for the common good with transparency and with integrity.
I'm sure with all of those problems, that's why so many people there are very happy to see the Pope in town. His trip has in some ways been overshadowed by a lot of security concerns, especially when he goes to the Central African Republic. What's happening there, and what do you think Pope Francis will handle or react to so much security?
Francis is arriving at a time when you have a transitional government in the Central African Republic. They had a new government that's been put together after the Seleka Muslim rebels were willing to give up power after a coup around 2013. The CAR is still racked, especially in the capital of Bangui, with terrible strife, religious and political. Francis obviously is somebody who will respect the security concerns. In fact, they're looking at each possible stop in the CAR as to whether or not they can actually take that risk. Francis, I think, is more than willing to go out into a war zone. But the one concern that he will have, and I think that this will temper some of his decisions, is that he does not want other people to be hurt while taking care of him.
Right. So during the Synod on the Family, African bishops came out as leaders and supporters of the church's teaching on marriage and the family. The church there is growing in Africa. Do you think that Africa could in some ways be the leader of the church within the next 50 years?
Well, I like to say that the church in Africa right now is a leader for the global community, the global Catholic Church. We saw that with the last two synods. African bishops have emerged as powerful spokespeople for the culture of life in resisting also what Francis talks about, ideological colonization, resisting the problems, the imposition from the West of the culture of death. We have leaders such as Cardinal Sarah, Cardinal Arinze, Cardinal Njue, and others. Africa is on a pace to become, I think, what Pope Benedict was hoping it would become. As he said in 2009, Africa is emerging as a great spiritual lung for the world and for the church.
It really is interesting. It's going to be interesting to hear what Pope Francis has to say about all that. Dr. Matthew Bunson, thanks so much for being with us, as always.
Great to be with you.
And EWTN will provide complete coverage of the Holy Father's visit to Africa. Tomorrow you can see Pope Francis celebrate Mass at the University of Nairobi at 1:45 a.m. and again at 3 p.m. Eastern Time. Later tomorrow, the Holy Father will also visit the United Nations office of Nairobi at 9:30 a.m. Eastern Time. To see the complete schedule of events through Sunday, visit our website at EWTN.com. Coming up, a Nevada high schooler wins a legal battle with her public school to start a pro-life club. And we take a look back at one of the most famous trials in history.
I'm thankful for my religious vocation as a brother.
I'm thankful for my family and the food that they give me and all the love that they care for me.
I'm happy that I have my wife and my children and all of our family together to celebrate Thanksgiving.
So many across the nation giving thanks this week for their blessings. Thank you for joining us this evening. I'm Wyatt Goolsby. A victory for the young pro-lifer in the state of Nevada. A settlement has been reached between a student who wanted to start a pro-life club in her public high school and the school district. Angelique Clark was initially told by the school she could not start the club. The Thomas More Society sued on her behalf on the grounds Clark's First Amendment rights were being violated. The lawsuit has been dropped and Miss Clark's club has been approved. Jocelyn Floyd, Associate Counsel with the Thomas More Society, joins us via Skype from Chicago with more on this case. Jocelyn, why did the school first deny Angelique's request to start the group?
The school offered a variety of reasons for denying the club. The first one was that abortion is a controversial topic, and that's a common one we see across the country. Principals just tend to react to the subject of, oh no, it's controversial, can't have that. They also were concerned about the feelings of girls who may have had abortions, that they would feel harassed or bullied, that it would bring negative media attention to the school, and my favorite, that you're just a sophomore in high school and there are people far more qualified than you to talk about this subject, which is exactly opposite what high school administrators should be doing. There's someone more qualified than a high schooler to do almost anything, and high school administrators should be encouraging these students to grow into those experts who are more qualified.
So in addition to the school finally allowing a pro-life group, the school district changed its policy. Explain how that changed from their original argument.
As we researched what the school district's policy was to see if they had any legitimate grounds, we discovered that the structure of their policy violated the Federal Equal Access Act by making decisions about what clubs were allowed based on their content. And that is illegal according to this federal act that requires that when a school has any non-curriculum related club, they have to allow all of them on an equal basis regardless of their content. So we worked with the school board to revise the policy, and now they have one that meets the standards of the Federal Equal Access Act and the First Amendment to be fair and open to all student clubs regardless of the topic that the student wants to express.
Jocelyn, why is this such an important case when it comes to the freedom of speech?
It's important because we want to, in our schools at every level, encourage students to develop their own voice. This is the next generation. They're our next voters. They're our next policymakers. They're our next everything. And they need to develop their opinions on these important cultural issues of the day. And in the school system is a safe place for them to learn how to articulate and grow. And when the school censors topics that it doesn't like, it simply creates a one-sided discussion, and a one-sided discussion doesn't help anyone.
Jocelyn Floyd with the Thomas More Society, thanks so much for explaining the case to us.
Thank you.
This month marks 70 years since the beginning of the Nuremberg Trials. 22 Nazi officials were tried before an international war crimes tribunal in Germany. The first and most famous of those landmark trials, held by the Allied forces after World War II, began on November 20th, 1945. Almost a year later, 12 of the defendants were sentenced to death. 7 received prison sentences ranging from 10 years to life. 3 were acquitted. We're joined by Dr. Edna Friedberg, a historian at the U.S. Holocaust Memorial Museum in Washington, D.C. So, Edna, the trials were not focused solely on the Holocaust. Tell us about the purpose of the trials.
So the International Military Tribunal, more popularly known as the Nuremberg Trials for the city where it was held, were primarily a war crimes trial. The mass atrocities that we now call the Holocaust were but one subset of those being prosecuted.
So everyone knew basically during these trials that the Nazis were guilty, but the prosecutors had to build a case. How did they go about doing that?
So the prosecutors made a deliberate choice to base their prosecution on documents, on films, on photographs created by Nazi Germany itself. So 19 investigative teams scoured the sites of atrocities and submitted some 3,000 tons of documents into evidence during the course of the trial.
And that's a lot considering the fact that the Nazis also destroyed a whole lot of material as well, correct?
Yes, near the end of the war, they destroyed many, many documents, presumably millions of documents, and many were also destroyed in the course of Allied bombings of German territory.
So the whole world followed these trials when it happened. Tell us about the role of reporters and translators.
The media coverage of this trial was absolutely unprecedented. 325 correspondents for radio, newspapers, and also newsreels that were shown in movie theaters covered the trials, and they gave millions of average people a seat in the courtroom. There was also an innovative system of simultaneous translation at the trial into the court's 4 official languages, and that was done both for the outside audience and for all of the prosecution teams and defendants to understand the proceedings.
Like I say, it was such a historic proceedings. War has changed a lot since World War II. Are the results of the Nuremberg trials still a deterrent today?
It's hard to say whether they're a deterrent. I would say that courts are one way that societies express their values, and this international court was a way of saying that the world objected to war, and especially to aggression and violence against civilians. But it's also important to keep in mind other precedents that were set during the Nuremberg trials, for example, in medical ethics, that it is not allowable to perform medical experiments on human subjects without their consent. But in terms of war, when war is being waged by someone who is a suicide bomber, it's hard to say that any punishment or legal system is a deterrent.
Like I say, it's a whole different world in some ways today, but this is such an interesting and historic event. We really appreciate you coming in and talking to us about it. Dr. Edna Friedberg, thanks so much.
Thanks for having me.
Up next, GOP presidential candidate Ted Cruz tells us why the pro-life issue is key to his campaign. Plus, we get ready to celebrate Thanksgiving with a visit to an old-fashioned turkey farm.
I thank God that I'm alive, and I thank God that I'm still here.
I'm definitely thankful for my family on this Thanksgiving. Took a 14-hour bus trip just to come see them, so I'm going to spend some good time with them.
We're thankful for our health and our love for each other.
All good reasons to give thanks this week. Thank you for joining us this evening. I'm Wyatt Goolsby. EWTN will air the first in a series of special interviews with U.S. presidential candidates this weekend. Candidate Conversations 2016 features in-depth interviews with candidates on moral and constitutional issues for the upcoming election year. The first episode features Texas Senator Ted Cruz. Cruz says the first obligation for any public servant is to protect life.
As you look at the Declaration, that ordering of unalienable rights, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, I think is a very deliberate ordering. Without life, there is no liberty, and without liberty, there is no pursuit of happiness.
Dr. Robert George, a Princeton University professor and the founder of American Principles Project, hosts the program. Candidate Conversations 2016 with Robert George will premiere on EWTN this Sunday at 10 a.m. Eastern Time. Don't miss it. Kyle Feldscher is a reporter for the Washington Examiner. So Kyle, recent polls show Ted Cruz's popularity is surging in Iowa. Does he have what it takes to keep that up past Iowa?
You know, a lot of people are saying that he's the front runner in Iowa despite never having actually led in the state. Not only does he have lots of money to spend, or his super PAC does, but also he has a vast campaign infrastructure already built and has the conservative bona fides that a lot of people are looking for in candidates like Donald Trump. So he might be able to, at some point if Donald Trump drops out, siphon off some of those supporters and become one of the top 2, I think, candidates.
Do you foresee anyone dropping out before Iowa, or if not, who could be next?
With a field this big, there's going to be some winnowing of it in the next month or so. I think the probably next big name candidate to drop out is Ohio Governor John Kasich. He made a lot of people angry during the last Republican debate, becoming more aggressive, and he's kind of gone at Donald Trump a little bit, which has made a few people angry. I just don't think a lot of people are warming to him, and I keep saying he's the liberals' favorite candidate. He seems to have the least amount of conservative bona fides in this race right now.
I know Kasich has a lot of support, but it has been an uphill battle for him in many cases. The media is calling Donald Trump a liar for recent statements. What has he been saying? And do you think, quite frankly, his big mouth is going to hurt him?
You know, it's been another interesting week in the traveling Donald Trump roadshow. He this week said that he watched footage of thousands and thousands of Muslims celebrating the 9/11 terrorist attacks in in Jersey City, in New Jersey. That didn't happen. There is no footage, but it didn't seem to hurt him. He said that it was a Black Lives Matter supporter who was protesting at his rally, maybe needed to be roughed up. I think it's not going to hurt him, though. I don't think so. His supporters seem to really like the things that he's saying. It might hurt him with people who support other candidates, but they're not Donald Trump's base. And at this point, Donald Trump, he seems to be post-truth. He can say whatever he wants, and his supporters are going to really be going for it. So it'll be interesting to see if that continues going forward as people actually vote.
And like I say, there's a lot more to come, especially within the next 2 months. I know you're going to be following that, and us as well. Kyle Fletcher, thanks so much for being with us.
Thanks for having me.
And finally tonight, Americans will soon be sinking their teeth into turkey, mashed potatoes, and stuffing. Abraham Lincoln declared Thanksgiving a federal holiday to thank God in 1863. Our Jason Calvi visits a Virginia farmer who is raising turkeys just like they did in Lincoln's time.
So you talk to these turkeys? These heritage turkey breeds date back to the 1800s. What does that mean?
It means we survived Thanksgiving dinner.
Farmer Elaine Boland will sell 600 turkeys this Thanksgiving.
It is like almost Grace's size.
At $8 a pound, the McKennas shelled out more than $150 for their 19-pound bird, while the average price for a fresh turkey is $1.74 a pound.
If you think about what food does for you and the fact that it forms your cells, because we're always making new cells, and new cells are being formed all the time, and we have to have good fuel for that.
Elaine says raising birds the traditional way, free range with a diet of grass, bugs, and non-genetically modified feed, is worth it.
As we transitioned to all farm-raised meats and got away from the grocery store, all of the allergies in our family disappeared. Everybody in our family was on asthma and allergy medicine.
The farm also feeds Elaine's spiritual life.
There's a peacefulness when you're outside working. Sometimes it's just that quiet time and the tranquility that comes. And then teaching me patience, maybe teaching me the virtues. You guys are funny.
Virtues like exercising patience with her other kids, or when she's making broth, using organ meats, bones and all.
Oh man, it's really good.
The flavor there?
Yeah, the flavor is
Sometimes
so
I
rich.
take it off too soon and you don't quite get all the flavor,
Thanksgiving may be just one day, but Elaine will be feeding families for months to come. In Virginia. Can I try that?
Yeah, try
it. Jason Calvi, EWTN News Nightly.
Thanks for that story, Jason. And we thank you for watching our program tonight. We'll see you back here same time Friday for our Giving Thanks special. For the EWTN News Nightly team, I'm Wyatt Goolsby. We leave you tonight with scenes from the Holy Father's Day in Kenya. Good night and God bless.